So out of all the Nintendo created IPs, my personal favorite has to be the Metroid series. Now that may come as a bit of a surprise, especially since I have so many Pokemon related shorts on my channel, but truth is, it is indeed Metroid, and it has been for a very long time. And the reason being might actually surprise you. It's because the Metroid series has a discernible, understandable time of events from start to finish. Just about every single game in the series has its own dedicated slot in the overall timeline, and that's the reason I love this series so much, because there's an actual story being told there. And while other Nintendo games do tell stories, not all of them have the same precision and care when it comes to the overarching story. Now, you may not think there's really much of a story to tell about a bounty hunter woman who spends her time mostly alone in space and on desolate planets, but there is. And it happens in several different story arcs as well. See, way back when I was first getting into the Metroid series, the Star Wars movies were coming to an end with Episode 3. If only that stuck. And I was fascinated with the idea of there being 6 movies that told a story within 2 different periods of time, but all came together in the end. And I was discovering that Metroid was essentially doing the same thing. And if you go back and look at the Metroid Prime 2 bonus disc, it contains a pretty cool visualization of what the entire series was up until that point, and that definitely piqued my interest when I was younger. So the timeline basically consists of 5 side-scrollers, the 4 Prime games, and... Anywho, so this is how they all fall into place. There's the original Metroid / Zero mission, then we have Prime Hunters, Prime 2 and 3, Federation Force. Then we have Metroid 2 Return of Samus / Metroid Samus Returns, Super Metroid, Metroid Other M, Metroid Fusion, and finally Metroid Dread. Now you're probably wondering if I forgot about Prime 4. The reason I didn't mention it is because we don't have an exact placement for where it falls in the timeline, but we have a pretty good idea. Because according to the developers, Prime 4 takes place after Super Metroid, but before Fusion. So that means it's really only in one of 2 slots. It's either before Other M or directly after. And if you ask me what my personal opinion is, I feel like it takes place after. Reason being is because in that game, Other M, Samus is really feeling the effects of Super Metroid, and those things are still fresh in her mind. We're going to talk about that again in a moment, but for that reason, I feel like Prime 4 takes place after Other M. So anywho, those are the game's placement within the overall timeline, and I have an appreciation for each of them. I love the original / Zero mission era, as it literally shows us what Samus's first mission was as a bounty hunter, and despite her success, it also showed what her limitations were, and how going back to her roots allowed her to overcome those limitations and become the bounty hunter we all know. And then the Prime series immediately picks up the story from there. Now I should mention that the Metroid Prime series is considered a subset of the overall Metroid story. And what I mean by that is there are the 5 mainline Metroid stories, that being the original / Zero mission, Return of Samus / Samus Returns, Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Dread. They are each numbered 1 through 5 and can be considered the quote-unquote main games in the franchise, whereas the Prime games and Other M are considered sub-series. But that doesn't mean the Prime series is not canon. It absolutely is, and it even adds a whole lot of lore to the series, as one of the main mechanics of the Prime series is the ability to scan objects in the environment. And a huge portion of the things you can scan are data log entries from the Galactic Federation, alien races such as the Chozo, the Luminoth, and even the Space Pirates. And what's interesting is the Space Pirates comment directly on the events of Zero Mission, and they even give insight into their perspective of Samus and what their ultimate goals are. And the Prime series really sets up its own little story in the Metroid universe, as it focuses on Samus's interaction with other bounty hunters, the deadly Phazon substance, and of course the whole Dark Samus arc. And as soon as the Phazon arc ends with Prime 3, we get back to the main numbered series with Metroid 2, The Return of Samus / Samus Returns, which starts a series of events involving the baby Metroid. What I think is fascinating about this part of the story is that this small, seemingly insignificant little Game Boy game has huge ramifications for the rest of the series. It directly sets up the story for Super Metroid, which sees Samus return back to the location of her very first mission on her search for that baby Metroid. And the ending of this game has a deeply emotional effect on Samus, which we see play out in Metroid Other M. And the events continue to steamroll into each other, ultimately leading to Fusion, which is where I feel the story with the baby Metroid starts to conclude, and the story regarding the X begins, leading even further into Metroid Dread. So you can see what I mean by what I said earlier, that each game in the series has its own dedicated slot on the overall timeline. And what I also find pretty cool is that the order in which the games are released isn't chronological. So there's great opportunities for the story to continue and be expanded upon in the future. Let me give you an example. Super Metroid was a definitive moment in the story, as it was the end to several different things, namely the planet Zebes ecosystem, Ridley, and the space pirates. However, variations of these things actually showed up again later on in Metroid Fusion. And at the time of Metroid Fusion's release, there really wasn't much of an explanation given as to how it was possible that they could appear again, even though they had already died. But many years down the line, when Metroid Other M was released, it not only answered how it was possible that those things appeared in Fusion, but also how it came about as well. And I really appreciated that they made the effort to address things like that. Now, historically, Nintendo hasn't always put a whole lot of effort into keeping their games in a consistent timeline. I mean, the Super Mario Bros. Games don't really gain much from having some long continuity, and don't even get me started on the Zelda timeline, seriously. But despite it not being one of Nintendo's biggest priorities or one of its biggest moneymakers, unfortunately, it is one of the few series that they have where the long-term story does matter. And personally, I'm all for it. But what do you think? Do you enjoy the idea of Metroid having a distinct overall story? Do you wish more Nintendo properties took a page from this book and had their own overall story and timeline? Please let me know. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.